I will tell you in reflection, I did go back and listen to the stuff I was talking about today and then actually had a conversation with somebody who does quantum computing. I definitely drew out some connections I probably shouldn't have. Hey, but whatever. I think it sounded good.
Listen, it's our show and you used a lot of multisyllabic words, so I was there with you.
And it's not like a TED Talk. It's more like a Bob Talk. Like,
That's true.
Oh, Bob Talk. I like that.
Welcome back to Whyte Noise. I'm so excited about our guest today. Ryan, you found our special guest today, so please do the honors.
I will have to tell you, I did give the Chat GPTs a little bit of credit here. I went to Chat GPT and I said, hey, we need to find somebody who's cool, who knows archaeology, that would be open to being on a podcast. And Chat GPT was like, you need to go talk to David. So David, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for finding me. I didn't know I'm on the Chat GPTs now, so I feel cool.
I think we're all on the Chat GPTs. It's over.
Yeah, we're cooked.
We're cooked. They have all of us. They're like, you're there because there is a David Ian Howe that they've already created.
Yeah, just like a little like Pokemon version of me somewhere in the PC.
It's like, are you actually the real David or are you the Chat GPT David?
Your virtual David is the real David. No, I'm sorry.
That's a question for my therapist, which I'll come back with.
I love that that's how this all came about. And I also personally, now that I have found you, I can't wait to dive into your podcast.
Yeah. Tell us.
Well, the podcast is new and fledgling, I'd say. I had an original podcast I did, I had an older podcast I did with two other colleagues called A Life in Ruins. And that was with the Archaeology Podcast Network. And we interviewed archaeologists about their careers and like their research and whatnot. And then mostly just other grad students at the time. But now I have two podcasts that are my own, and one's the David Ian Howe Show. And that is just interviewing people I find interesting. And then ethno-synology. It's basically my YouTube channel, but like audio form, if that makes sense. So it's supposed to be about dogs, but I do anything from, ethno-synology is the study of dogs in human cultural contexts. So anything to do with archaeology and dogs kind of I lump in there, but I have so many interests that all just kind of blend. Most every episode's about dogs in some way. Yeah.
Well, archaeology and dogs are two things that I very much nerd out about. So that's what
Awesome.
I mean. I'm about to become your number one fan. And so
Okay.
this is a very exciting day for me.
Sure. Yeah.
The archaeology background is so perfect for our topic today, which is the pyramids. Do you know anything about them?
I'm a prehistoric archaeologist, so asking me about that would be like asking your dentist about your ankle, but we can talk about it, if that makes
Great.
sense. Yeah.
Can you imagine if you're like, nope, I'm out. Goodbye.
No.
There's a wasp in my house I have to address.
Oh, right. Thank you for reminding me. I forgot about that.
Yeah, if David just like disappears, it's because there's a wasp currently stalking him in his house that you've already done battle with, and you won the battle. You're just not sure if you've won the war.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I can talk pyramids.
Great. And the way we work too, I feel like, in case you don't know, we'll get a topic and it literally is just whatever it makes each of us think of. So, and we each get 10 minutes to riff on that topic, and it's like the least formal TED Talk you've ever seen, because we are experts on none of these things. And so feel free to chime in. And like with photosynthesis last week, I was talking about things and our guest was fully correcting me on certain things.
Okay.
So feel free to be like, Michael, you're a dum-dum. Because at the end of it, you choose a winner and whatever that means for you. All right. Pyramids. Which one of us would you like to hear go first? You get to choose.
You're in the center of the screen, Michael, and I've only been staring at you, so I'm going to let Ryan speak, I guess, for a second, so I don't just keep my eyes in one direction.
I mean, it's fine if you just want to look at me. I get it.
It is, yeah. You got a nice background and everything.
I'm not hurt.
I did my beard trimmed like 2 weeks ago. Sorry about that, but
You look great.
mainly not to look at it. It's like because I keep scratching it, which does pick up on the microphone. But anyway, that's a different.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
like a whole ASMR thing. I'm sure someone out there really appreciates the beard scratching.
They're like,
Both you and Ryan have fantastic beards.
appreciate that.
For me, it's a tell, by the way. So like if I start suddenly like scratching my beard, I'm usually like ruminating on something or I don't have a good answer for you. So I have to be really careful about whether or not I do it at work.
Now you got me thinking.
So keep an eye out for that as you judge us as we give our presentations.
You're scratching your beard. You're full of shit. But the nice part is I am full of shit. So it's not really a tell.
Oh, man. Okay, Ryan,
All right.
your time starts now.
So the Great Pyramids, as a little bit of background, our host last week threw this out and he threw it under the context of the news that just recently came out where they used a resonance imaging technology to basically observe, or what they believe they're observing are 8 vertical shafts below the first pyramid that go something down over 2,000 feet with staircases that wrap around them that sit atop two cube structures that are roughly 232 feet wide. So it's this like massive unexplained structure underneath the pyramids that I think in reality, if it is true, if they do prove it to be true, it rewrites history a little bit. It gives us a different understanding of who we are as humans as it relates to that time, and what the actual technologies were, where did it go. It would be a little bit of a Pandora's box. So in getting into the pyramids, I think the number one thing, or the number one theme around all of it, is that we actually just don't know shit as it relates to the pyramids.
Yeah.
And the most famous archaeologist around them is Dr. I think it's Zahi Hawass. He's like the minister for archaeology and like Egyptian archaeological history for the Egyptian government. And he's like the top authority as it relates to things. He's an interesting character because he likes to pre-bunk new ideas. So he's already all over this thing saying it's bullshit. He likes to be the guy with the final word. So there's kind of this generic thing that if he's not in front of the camera in his Indiana Jones hat announcing the finding or the discovery, it's usually not true, which, by the way, there's receipts to show that he's done this multiple times where he's been like, yeah, this is bullshit. It's not a thing. And they have like physicists and everything come through and they go, no, this is pretty true. And it's resulted in finding other chambers within the pyramids that he's now like folded and said, okay, yeah, that's actually there. But he's apparently a very stark nationalist. And there's a generic concern by the Egyptians that, they've written this whole narrative around the pyramids, and undermining that narrative might hurt their tourism, might hurt their nationalism, would potentially make them look like liars. And, actually, after everything I've read, they might be. But the thing is, what's funny is I don't know that this is a problem, because if some of the discoveries that are out there that aren't necessarily verified yet, if they would allow them to be verified, in my opinion, would actually draw in more tourism and would bring more people in, because it's pretty interesting. There are a whole bunch of theories around what they are. The first is that they're a symbolic tomb, or like a cosmic launch pad. It's a misnomer that they're a tomb, because there's actually, which is kind of interesting, no inscriptions and virtually nothing attributing them to the pharaohs that they're believed to be attributed to. A vast majority of the writing or hieroglyphs that tell the story of the structures were written many years later than when the pyramids were constructed, and are in surrounding structures and not the actual pyramids themselves. They believe they were a place of spiritual rebirth, so they're giant resonance chambers. So they believe possibly that the pharaohs repurposed them, like they went into them, had like spiritual experiences, and were reborn, ready to lead, or to, bring on the next phase of whatever the society was supposed to have at the time. And then the really like fringe idea is that they're power plants. What's interesting is I think these underlying structures may lend a little bit to that concept, because heavy resonance chambers, a lot of the interior materials, especially in the places that they referred to as tombs, were actually radioactive isotopes or radioactive granite. Like I read a little bit into this, is like essentially the resonant vibration of water running underneath of them can translate into actual energy generation through the granite isotopes when it's isolated and consolidated at a fast level.
Wow.
Yeah, that's you've heard all, am I tracking to things?
Yeah, so like pyramid stuff is like just, it's news to like American archaeologists that study stone tools, like as it is to you, kind of. How would I explain this? Like I do, from like the grapevine and like seeing people share like in groups I'm in and stuff like that, like when this stuff comes up, like what are your thoughts? And like I'm no expert on it, but I have seen some like professional opinions like pop through and like what people have been saying about it and stuff. But the interesting thing is I've seen there's a lot of pseudoscientists that like love Egyptian stuff, and they love talking about the Great Cover Up and Zahi Hawass, who I have my issues with too. But like, it seems the consensus with the pseudo archaeologists and the fringe archaeologists, and like two of my colleagues and two pseudo archaeologists went on Piers Morgan the other day, talking about it, and they all agreed that like, yeah, the power cell thing is just like bullshit, which is like weird to have them all agree. So that's kind of cool to me. But the in terms of like the resonance chamber and all that I have not the slightest clue on. I just do know from most of what the archaeologists that I've seen post about it or talk about it that, and this happens with probably most science, but archaeology all the time, is like there's the baseline, here's the study and what we found. And then like CBS or CNN or Fox News, like they just take it and the headlines go crazy. And then this whole narrative gets made of like crazy thing upends Egyptian, understanding and stuff. But like really it's just a big chamber beneath the pyramids that like then, and like the resonance imaging or like the, not LiDAR, whatever it was they used to get down
It's
there
like
to see all that.
SAR, I think is what it was called, or like I forget what the
Okay. Yeah, something new.
something resonance.
It's not as good as like you would think it is, and like a lot of the reconstructions that are getting put on these news outlets make it look so much more fancier than it is. It's just like the best way to describe it is the opening scene of Jurassic Park. They're using ground penetrating radar to show you the velociraptor underneath the ground. There's no, even 25, 30 years later from Jurassic Park, there's no technology that you can see a full skeleton like that underground. It would be like little, it's like you're looking at Pong or like a Nintendo 64 under the ground. So yeah, that there's that. But I will say Zahi Hawass, and yeah, he's the minister of something, whatever we just pointed out, but he's like the main guy for Egyptology over there.
Yeah.
Archaeology does have a problem with people that are like the spokespersons for X, Y, and Z. And I'm speaking as who's a spokesperson for the dog aspect, but like the older crowd has their ways and their views, and then he's probably right about 70 to 90% of it, I would imagine. But it's like that little bit that he's like, refuses to believe, then lets all that other stuff creep in where it's like, well, you lied about this, and then what else are you hiding, kind of thing. And then especially with something,
he's a function of the government, right? Like,
and it's a nationalistic thing.
Yeah, and I think, like, in other words, and I also kind of lead into the fact that I think there money's involved, right? So
Sure.
if Egypt is, their predominant way of making money is tourism, right? They're going to do everything they can to protect that. So, I mean, I get the idea of the deep protection of it and the, the avoiding of other things because they don't want to rewrite the history. And I would also tell you that I think like there's a pretty significant thing within regionally those cultures around being identified as a liar and protecting truth or protecting what is perceived to be truth. So I think it's all kind of like interrelated.
Yeah. And archaeology, there's so much I could go on and talk about, but like where it came from was like, rich British people in like the 1800s going out and collecting curiosities and bringing it back. And then just like, it was a
Stealing,
a tool of colonialism, essentially. And then from there with, Captain Cook, and like that was even before that, but going around and exploring, there's a whole world out here. How do we systematically study these peoples that are here? That's where anthropology comes from. But then in the 30s in Europe, nationalism became a pretty big hot button issue, and archaeology became a tool of like a certain country to like prove that it was better than another. And Britain was doing this forever too, trying to like say like the oldest humans are in Britain, and then the Chinese government now is also trying to say like the oldest hominins are from China, and like it just becomes a tool of the government. And it's interesting here in America because it's like our history starts in 1492 here. So like you can't claim much below that. Then like this whole cabal conspiracy that archaeologists are all like trying to cover and hide the truth and stuff. It's like I have nothing to do with that as an American archaeologist, but I'm still lumped in sometimes with like, well, why don't you believe this?
David, you're literally leading to my final point, which is
Hell yeah.
what are you really hiding from us?
That's actually why you're here, and ChatGPT brought you up.
The Sphinx was a dog. I was kidding. Yeah. So I forget where I was going, but it can be used as a tool in that sense, and especially in old world sites like that are just so fascinating. Oh, that's where I was going. Was Egypt, like, to the Chinese, to, you know, people in Peru, to people in England, to people here in Tennessee. It's like there's no culture on earth that ever existed like Egypt. It's just so fascinating, and like nothing's that similar to it. And it's so mysterious, and like even to the Romans and the Greeks, it was old. So like there's such a layer of mystique to it that, like, of course, like, you're always going to want to know more, and like someone's going to try to control the narrative on it and stuff like that. And I think Zahi has definitely, or I should say Dr. Hawass, never met him. He's always the guy on History Channel. Like, if you don't know who we're talking about, people listening, like, you've seen this guy.
He likes to be in front of the camera.
Yeah. And I think that is problematic, and it's causing more problems than it needs to, because then you get all these, especially with Instagram and Twitter, people just post whatever they want and say, like, look at this, look at, they're hiding from you. And it's like, dude, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is, like, conceptually, I think we need to get better as a society. Like, I love the word peer-reviewed science, right? And so much of this shit isn't fully peer-reviewed. So this, like, finding right now is not fully peer-reviewed. And if you get to that full peer review and get that full consensus, then you can feel, I think, a lot more comfortable with what's being, but we're not willing to wait. Come on. No money can be made. No money can be made if we don't just sensationalize it.
Exactly.
And the money, and that's the funny thing, like, as an archaeologist here, I don't make any money off that stuff. And even if you are publishing something that gets into Nat Geo, like I was on a site earlier this year or last year that was funded by Nat Geo and stuff like that. And like, that goes to like paying for buckets and like the excavator, like, to come in with the track hoe to do it. And like, it doesn't really go to the and it does pay like wages, but like you're not sitting in Scrooge McDuck amounts of money, you know, like swimming through like coins. But in Egyptology, you might be, I don't know.
Are you ready for the next round?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. I hope that wasn't like a downer, or I had like something.
No, that was great.
No. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you're good.
Please. I was like, keep vamping, because I don't know that I have 10 minutes. I think I have like 4, but it might be a really quality 4. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
All right. Ready?
Yes.
Set, go.
Okie dokie. When I thought pyramids, obviously I thought the same thing. You know, I immediately thought of like, oh, the chambers that they found, which I do find fascinating. And then sort of same what we were talking about with pre-bunking or whatever. But when I first saw the graphics and I was like, that's insane. And then I saw what they actually showed, and you're right. It's just like pretty lights. And you're like, how did you get from that to this?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I love this idea. And I did read that they think it possibly could have been from the civilization that was before the Egyptians, that was affected by the comet that hit Earth, 13,000 years ago, which I did not know about until I like read about it. I was like, oh, we did get hit with something, and it did wipe out a lot of things. And just some fun random factoids as to like how old I didn't realize that mammoths and Egyptians lived at the same time. But I think it's interesting, this idea that they potentially built the pyramids on top of an already existing thing that a previous civilization had created.
Yeah.
I think that's cool, because I think a lot of ancient civilizations did that, where they built structures on top of something else that was meaningful to them.
Well, they were saying that they actually think the pharaohs potentially just repurposed these things. Like we attribute them to the pharaohs, but the pharaohs were like, oh, these are pretty, I like them.
Well, and the idea too that they were like whatever civilization they're I think looking into the idea that they have more information about them than they think, because the Egyptians wrote about these like previous gods and previous kings and these like myths, and they're just like, what if those weren't myths? What if those were real people and these were stories that were just sort of handed down? And by the time somebody got around to writing them down, they were like, that's crazy, that can't be.
Sure.
But it was. Anyway, fun little things for us all to look up later. What my connection to this, though, was the Orion correlation theory, which I did not know about. And it turns out I have kind of a personal connection to. So for them who were like me up until an hour ago, the Orion correlation theory is the idea that the pyramids are in the same line as Orion's belt. And they just about are.
Oh, I thought this was the Ryan's correlation theory. I thought this was about me.
And that's that that's that everything was built specifically for you, Ryan. Yes. They're very similar theories. We'll get into that one another day. But the Orion, Orions.
Cue the theme music.
I do know that. I remember that commercial.
Correlation theory. Yeah, so it's that the Egyptians built the pyramids purposely in the same pattern as Orion's belt, which was a special. I didn't realize just basically every civilization latched on to that particular constellation. I think they latched into a lot of constellations, but that was a big one. That's where they thought Osiris's soul was there. So it sort of makes sense considering he was the god of the dead, I believe, for the Egyptians, and was the one who judged them in the afterlife. And also the god of rebirth and things dealing with death and rebirth. And I was so excited to see that because when I went to Egypt with my family a while ago, and sometimes you go to a place and you just sort of have this feeling like that you can't expect. I'm not a super like woo woo person, but like
Sure.
It was a very like woo woo experience. Like I remember just like we went to the pyramids and feeling this just sort of like, this like calm.
Were you a pharaoh in a previous life?
I think I was, or I was just like really jet lagged, but I think I was a pharaoh. And even like there were certain temples we went to where I just had this really familiar, comfortable feeling. And if I like would touch a stone, it like felt there was just like this good positive feeling that I haven't had many other places, and especially someplace I'd never been. And I don't know why I had this real strong connection to it. And anything especially to do with rebirth and the dung beetle I really connected to. I ended up getting a necklace of like a little dung beetle because for them when they pushed, they believed like a mythical dung beetle
like
pushed
I really
the sun
hope
up.
you elaborate on this.
Yeah, no, I have a really strong connection to poo.
We all do. Everybody does. Everybody poops.
It is the one human constant we all identify with.
Listen, you quite literally get the shit out. It's very psychologically satisfying. Unless it doesn't go well and you die. Like that guy in The Sopranos that I just watched who dies having a heart attack. Anyway, I digress. No, the dung beetle, because they believed
I can't remember that
that
one.
the sun was basically like a big hot boiling thing of dung, and there was a big beetle that like pushed it up at the beginning of the day, and so it was a really special symbol for them. And I really latched onto that. So cut to me a few years later, I was doing a play in Florida and had this sort of like bad experience and was sort of mentally in kind of a bad place. And I would sit out at night after the show on my little stoop, and I looked up, and the first thing I always saw was Orion's belt. And I don't know why, but seeing that constellation just sort of made me feel better. And I can't explain it, but it just was like, it was reassuring. It was almost like this little friend in the sky that was kind of like looking out for me.
Sure.
As crazy as that sounds. And even at the moment, I was like, I am a nutbag. But like, this is a thing that is giving me comfort, and I can't fully explain it, but it is. And later, my sister and I went to get tattoos for the first time. And she was getting this cool, complicated tattoo. And I didn't know what I wanted until I walked in. And I was like, I want Orion's belt. Because it's something that makes me feel good. And there are nights that I can't see it, obviously, but I would like to have it. And so the guy, I was like, I just want 3 little dots on my side. And that's my tattoo.
Hell yeah.
And I remember the tattoo artist was like, for seriously, that's all you want? Do you want me to like connect them, make them look like stars? I was like, nope, because I don't care if anybody else knows what this is. I will know what this is. So I have 3 little black dots. And it's also, I have a bunch of like moles too. So even I remember going back and showing my boyfriend, I was like, look, I got a tattoo. And he was like, where?
Yeah.
It literally just looks like I have 3 moles. And even my dermatologist, I went at one point and I was like, so I have this one mole I'm concerned about. And she's like, that's fine. But these 3, we should test those. I was like, no, those are my tattoo. And she was like, she judged me so hard. She was like, that's your tattoo. But I love it. It makes me really happy. And when I'm kind of stressed, like I'll touch it and it makes me feel better. So I was really excited when I now learned about this Orion correlation theory, that there was something about the pyramids maybe in line with that constellation. And then also the pyramids in Mexico, just outside Mexico City, which I went to and also had a really cool experience. while I was at those pyramids. And it's interesting that they are also in the same formation. So just for me, it was this really cool thing where I was like, well, this constellation that I have a very personal connection to also could be in line with two places that I've been to that also I'd kind of like woo-woo feelings at. So I've never been one of those like aliens did it or whatever. And I don't think aliens did it, but it was just this whole like the fact that there are energies in the universe and stuff like that that people talk about. It was just one of those moments. I was like, maybe there's more that we can't see, feel, or touch that just sort of inspires people or touches you in a way that we're all more connected than we think we are in a lot of those ways. So that was just my exciting thing when I was reading about this.
I was going to say, I think it is actually fact. Like, in other words, of the facts on the pyramids, they are astronomically aligned. Like, there's no, like...
Yeah, I don't think there's any hiding that. Yeah.
Well, because there are people, when I was reading more about this theory, there are a lot of scientists that were like, that's not a thing. It's just a coincidence. You know, like, they didn't plan that on purpose. But it seems pretty... If it was an accident, it seems like a pretty happy accident.
There are a number of other mathematical constants throughout the engineering and architecture, right? So, apparently
Yeah, there's one that's like
the golden ratio, and it follows the Earth's dimensions.
Yeah, like that one, I remember seeing several people, like, that one gets latched onto a lot. And I've seen people, like, debunk that as in, like, basically, like, whenever people present that formula that it's, like, the exact circumference of the Earth, it's, like, whatever algorithm or whatever Graham Hancock says that it is, like, you can pump in any number and plug it in and you'll get what you want from it, which I that's the stuff that I have no idea on. But I do know... Yeah, they are offset kind of like Orion's belt in some way. I'm not sure about the ones in Mexico. I didn't know that.
They're pretty much the exact same ones too. How do you pronounce it?
Teotihuacan?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. That they're also in the same formation.
Okay, interesting.
Astrology has been like a human constant.
Oh,
across
forever.
almost all cultures. I was going to say, I think it's innately human to look at the sky and look at constellations and potentially feel comfort because it's always there. It's reliably there. So, in other words, you can always rely on it.
I have 3 moles on my chest that literally are in Orion's belt. I just remembered that, and that's what I was looking at. I'm not going to whip them out and show it's covered in hair, but yeah, I was going to joke that we all are connected to it. But yeah, I think like what Ryan's saying, it's like obviously Napoleon and Alexander the Great and Augustus felt the same thing when they went to Egypt, and they were like, "This is cool," and like it's just such a unique. Like Napoleon wrote extensively about like the same thing. He was just like, "This is so sick" when he was here trying to take Egypt. A lot of times we, as modern humans, don't really appreciate looking up as much as like we're looking down and reading and like looking at our screens and stuff. You want to get that metaphysical with it, but like back then, like especially if you think of like the Polynesians, they made it all the way to Hawaii and Easter Island using stars. So it's like the whole night sky was just completely different to them than it is now. So it would make sense that if you have if you're like a god king or a deity, or you want to get closer to the sun god, which the Aztecs and the Maya and the Egyptians had a sun god in a sense, you want to get higher to that. The best way to get there is to stack stones systematically higher because you can't do it straight up like we can with steel. So you're going to get there, and then if you're looking up and you see those constellations, I'm pretty sure Orion is the brightest one, because growing up in New York City, it's the only one I could see. That's probably just that, and to my knowledge, but whether they were like sitting around a table contemplating the circumference of the Earth and stuff, because I think they all knew the Earth was round. Pythagoras knew that, and not Aristotle, one of them. One of the Ptolemy scholars knew, like basically on obelisks, they did experiments. Carl Sagan talked about it. They could tell that the Earth was round. There's probably people that will debunk that it's connected to, it's in Orion's belt shape, but it seems to look that way to me. I don't whether that was intentional or not.
Well, we know consistently that a lot of things in time have been like the way things are built. Like it is consistent that we can find the astronomical patterns and stuff. I think this was just an innate human behavior because it was the only thing that was constant in their lives.
And everyone's looking at the same sky. Yeah. Well, I guess different hemispheres, it's different, but
still similar exposure over time.
Yeah, you're going to see the same. Everyone sees the same thing at some point in the year. Yeah, there's that. And then there's the whole theory that they're all like the megalithic structures and pyramids on Earth are on this specific line around the Earth. That's like been debunked quite a bit because then it's like, then you're leaving out, all the Mississippians and you're leaving out stuff that happens in like other parts of Africa.
That's not a story if we do that.
It's not as fun, David.
I think it's like if you go through Mexico, Egypt, and like South where Angkor Wat is in Southeast Asia or whatever those ones are, it's all like. But if you draw a line around the world, it's a sphere in any direction. You're gonna hit something that's interesting. So maybe not through the middle of the Pacific, but well, I guess Easter Island is on that line. From what I understand, there's the whole thing about the water erosion on the Sphinx too, and that's a big Hancock thing that he talks about. And Zahi Hawass is like, no, and like from nerds that I know that like study rock and like geology and geoarchaeology is a huge aspect of understanding archaeology. So how like archaeological sites form and deposit and whatnot. The Giza Plateau is a very karstic environment, meaning it's like very wet limestone that can like easily is chiseled. The water makes these big like reservoirs and stuff, kind of like in Mexico with the Maya. That's a very karstic environment. So like the water erosion on the Sphinx is just water erosion from the stone that was already on there that they were then chiseling in, like, so that's what you're seeing. But also, I'm not explaining that perfectly, but these big chambers that are underneath the pyramids, I would imagine there's probably more because it's such a karstic environment where there's like holes and big reservoirs under the ground. There's going to be a lot more of that. And now that we have this tech that can penetrate beneath these giant stone structures to see that, you're probably going to find a lot more. And maybe that's building on top of, there might have been something under there that the new pharaohs then build on top of, you know?
Well, and interesting, when I was talking to my sister, I keep bringing her up. She researches a lot. She's one of my go-to people where like she knows a lot more facts than I do. We were talking about this, and her theory was that she said they also may have found more tunnels, almost like an anthill, that just like keep going out into the desert from those core pillars.
And that would track then, yeah.
And she was like, I wonder if it's not, they were like, is it this? She was like, I wonder if it's just as simple as it's hot. And there were times of year where they just dug down and they lived, worked, did things underground because it was just more comfortable. Or for preservation purposes. Like, it's not anything super exciting. It was like an Egyptian shopping mall underground.
Preserve food pretty well down there, too.
She didn't put it that way. I'm putting it that way. She was much more eloquent. I just like to imagine that there was a Mall of Egypt underneath they were like, welcome to Egyptian Neiman Marcus.
I'm going to the myrrh store right now.
It was all under there.
Do you need any myrrh?
There were a bunch of like old Egyptian folks getting their steps in under there, like power walking.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. We're way over my time, but
actually, you kind of finished right on time, and then we just had like a nice chat.
Oh my God, look at us go.
David, you have the hard part now. Who won?
Oh man, I don't know if I can do that.
You can also proclaim yourself the winner. That does happen.
Well, I feel weird because I want to be able to say like hell yeah to this stuff, but like I just, as like an archaeologist, I'm in this weird thing of like, well, I have to be skeptical about stuff, but then other things too. It's like I do want to believe cool shit and like new stuff that comes out. So I didn't mean to be like, I don't know about all of this, but
you're pretty allowed to be, so.
Oh, cool. I appreciate that. So thank you. I guess just based on Napoleon and Alexander the Great feel in the same way. I liked your story, Michael. Like just we all kind of
nice. Cheers, Michael.
Yeah, in the ethereal way. Ryan's, I think yours was more like, rooted in here's what the facts are and stuff. So I appreciate them both, if that makes sense. But
oh, yay. This is also, you should know, I very rarely win. So this is exciting.
I was starting to feel bad for Michael. Now I can be back on it. Now I'm going to get angry if he wins again. So
nice. As an archaeologist and like someone who's always fascinated by the past, I think something that humans always have, and this is why, again, Egypt is such a worldwide, phenomenon, and like everyone wants to emulate it in some way. People like old stuff, and I noticed like a lot of stuff that I worked on when I was working in Wyoming. You have like 13,000 years of history there. You have like the Paleolithic people that were hunting mammoths, and then you have homesteaders with the Oregon Trail, and then there's like modern Wyoming. And like you would see in like little rock shelters or like caves where people were camping for the night, I could find like 13,000-year-old tools. Or like maybe 7,000-year-old tools, and then like a cowboy belt buckle from some rancher that was there. And whether they both spent the night in that shelter at different times and they left the tools there, or the cowboy found that and brought it to the thing with them and just left it there. You see that quite often. And like homesteads, like you see a lot of people just probably this German family came through, dug a well, had a house there, then they moved on and went to Oregon. But they buried everything in this big well pit, and there were arrowheads in there that they clearly the kids probably found and were like, oh, this is cool. So like everyone has that connection to like they like old stuff, and like Qin Shi Huang in China like made a whole terracotta army of like artifacts to like live in the afterlife with. So it's like we all, I don't know, we all like that. Herodotus wrote all about Egypt or ancient stuff in ancient Greece. So we just have a connection, and like I guess where I'm going is I don't think it's that woo-woo at all to say like, you know, you feel the gravity of the place when you're there in Egypt, and especially I haven't been to the stuff in Mexico yet. I'd love to. But just to see, because I think Teotihuacan was ancient to the Aztecs when they got there. They were like,
It
"What is
was,
this?"
yeah.
So
They didn't know who built it. They
Yeah.
were, it predates them by a couple thousand years, I want to say.
It's like I've been to the ones in Guatemala, and I assume that's the same.
those
culture.
are Mayan.
Is that
there.
Mayan? Not
Yeah.
Aztec. My bad.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Mayans were like 500, 600 years before then. But yeah, Mayans are like the time of like the Crusades. The Aztecs were like at their height when the Spanish got there.
I have to tell you, I think, you know, you were like, this is like a dentist dealing with an ankle. You were absolute perfection in this. Thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. It's like your dentist does have to go to like med school still, so like he knows some stuff.
Well, that's
But,
true. But I mean, in this scenario, you would make a great podiatrist.
Tarantino would be proud.
Do you have a word for us? Do you have our next word?
Hey, geology. Like a geologist to talk about like the Giza Plateau being so karstic and stuff like that. Like something that never gets talked about, even if it's not to do with Egypt, is just geology and like how mountains form and how like, you know, things deposit, and how like if you think of the Rockies, it's two tectonic plates that just made a wave, and then the Wyoming and Kansas are all just the ripples of that. I don't know. Geology is cool to me. Yeah.
Geology is cool.
It is. Actually, I
Yeah.
have so many things I feel like I can go to, as well as personal stories. So that's a good one. Thank you.
Oh yeah, yeah,
great.
no problem.
Rock on.
Oh my God.
Sorry, I'm gonna see myself out. And again, friends, David Howe, YouTube, podcast.
Yeah, David Ian Howe. Go check out.
Instagram be the best one to find me and see the most stuff on, I would say.